underwater for maybe 4 or 5 months.
Oh,
I had a ballroom in the vicinity, and it was underwater. So I had 5 kids, lost a house, lost a business, and the wife packed the car with the kids and changed the diapers and drove into the French quarters where her relatives lived, and we survived there.
wow.
Until things got straightened out and we were able to rebuild.
Wow. Wow. Well, we're about to start. Is that right, Sean?
That's right. I was just waiting for the ticker to go to 7, and then I was going to say, hey, let's get this party started.
Okay.
I'm ready.
I try to run on, it's like Switzerland here. There we are. All right, we're going to let everybody in, and we'll play the music. Evening. I was going to say good morning. Wow. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Greatest Generation Live for Tuesday, July 26th. I'm Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit based in Western PA whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. For those of you who have not joined us before, it's great to see everybody here. Let's see here. We got Larry, saw you this morning. Ben, saw you this morning. A couple new faces. Henry, thanks for joining us. Henry's our youngest member here on the program. Carol Popchak, can't see you, but that's okay. It's great to have you in the room, and glad to see some new faces tonight. I will be handing over the hosting duties to Glenn Flickinger here in just a few short minutes. Glenn, how are you doing this evening?
Excellent. Looking forward to a great program.
Yeah, me too. This subject, it kind of captures you straight off the hop. But first, before we get to Glenn and our wonderful guests, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and talk a little bit about, as I let some more people in, I'm going to talk a bit about our sponsors and about what we have coming up here at the Veterans Breakfast Club. First and foremost is a sponsor that has been devout for quite some time, D&D Auto Salvage. They began operations as a small morning. Who knew where my brain was going to be tonight? Metal recycling company. Now they have 2 locations in Tarentum and Lawrenceville here in Western PA. They accept all kinds of metal. If you are looking for a quote, you can contact them at dndautosalvage.com. We want to thank them, as always, for being such great supporters of the VBC. They support us pretty much across the board here. So they're quite wonderful. Whoa, a little too fast there. Second sponsor is tobacco-free Adagio Health. They have also been, boy, I don't know what's going on here. This is kind of all over the place. There we go. There we go. Tobacco-free Adagio Health. They're dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and for getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoking. They're all about health. They want people to quit. They got nicotine replacement therapy. They have classes. They got a really great quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They recently went on the podcast that we produce at the VBC called The Scuttlebutt that I host. And they told us all about the programs that they provide. I suggest looking that up on our YouTube channel. They like to educate people about all the ways that you can get nicotine into your body between cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew, snuff, vaping. They will talk to you about it, and they advocate for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can check out everything that they have at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. This is our current magazine. So if you're joining us for the first time and you don't receive the magazine, it's because we don't have your address. If you want to email Todd, the executive director of VBC, Todd at veteransbreakfastclub.org, or myself, Sean at veteransbreakfastclub.org, that's SHAUN, we can get your address and we can get you this free magazine. It's about 36 pages, and it's always filled with really incredible stories front to back. We hear a lot of really great reviews about this, and it comes out quarterly. So if you would like to receive a copy of this, please be sure to give us an email and send us your address. We'd love to have you a part of our network. And as for upcoming programming tonight, obviously we have Greatest Generation Live, but we're on every Monday night for VBC Happy Hour. Upcoming in the next 2 weeks will be a two-parter. Todd sort of tasked me with reaching out and trying to find flight attendants who flew in and out of Saigon during the Vietnam War. This sort of sent me down a pretty big rabbit hole, and I was able to finally get in touch with a couple lovely ladies, and they put me in touch with the greater network, including a gentleman, Al Topping, who I guess was in charge of Pan Am in Southeast Asia. He's going to be coming on the program next week. And we have a lot of the flight attendants are going to be coming on. They still keep a pretty significant and social group online. I was able to tap into that, but we realized that the story was so big that we chose to split it into two, because part of this is Pan Am's Pan Am's sort of relationship with the government and how that all came about and why they pretty much sold their services to the government for $1. We're going to learn about that. And we're going to learn about the R&R flights from the flight attendants, those ladies who would be on the flights, bringing soldiers to R&R and then bringing them back into Vietnam, the stories that they were able to gather from the veterans. They're a tight-knit group, and the veterans mean a whole lot to them. But the second part of it is going to be Operation Baby Lift and the last flight out and the refugees. So big stories coming up in the next 2 weeks for the Pan Am crew. And finally, the Scuttlebutt, which I mentioned that I host. The new episode is live. You can find it on YouTube. I will put the link in the chat. This is a mother-daughter story, unlike any that I have ever heard. Lita Thomas and Jean Marie McNamara, both of them served in the Army, and the injury that Jean Marie sustained while in the Army is pretty significant in training. And the sort of love and support that they have for each other to be able to support each other is definitely not a story to be missed. So if you would like to watch it, click on the link that I'll put into the chat. That does it for me. I'm going to take a step aside and let Glenn fly here. Glenn, take it away.
Well, that's a very high expectation, the flying part anyway, Sean. Thank you very much.
I thought it was a good seg for this particular episode.
It is, because there's a lot of flying going on in this story that we're about to tell. So thanks much, Sean, for the introduction. So tonight we are returning to the 15th Air Force, flying out of southern Italy. Foggia, I think is the right pronunciation. We've had probably 3 or 4 other previous programs over the past couple of years about the 15th Air Force. This one is really a unique story. Very, very original research, and you hear the phrase never told story so often when you pick up books about World War II or about any historical event, and 90% of the time it's hype. This one doesn't even use that line, never told story, but it is a never told story. And this is the book, Lost Airmen. And we have the author with us tonight, Charles Stanley Jr., who wrote this as a labor of love because one of the primary characters in this book is his father, Charles Stanley Sr., who was a B-24 pilot flying in the 15th Air Force. Charles, where are you? Say hello. I don't see you on the screen right now.
I'm here. Hello. Glad to
Chuck,
be here.
And Charles goes by Chuck. Him and I have had a lot of screen time in the last few weeks, and it's been a pleasure to get to know you, Chuck. And congratulations on writing. And I've told him this several times, a very readable, exciting book to read. And I don't think Chuck would mind telling you, Chuck is not a professional journalist or historian or writer, long-time service in the New York State government, but he certainly learned how to write well. So congratulations, Chuck. It's a great book.
Thanks, Glenn. It's been great working with you over the last couple of weeks.
Okay. And we also have on, and we'll introduce him now, then we'll get into our story with some of the pictures and PowerPoint slides we have, an actual veteran of this event, which we're thrilled to have on. And his name is Joe Foto. Joe, could you say hello to our audience, please?
Hello, audience. How are you?
Thank you for being on, Joe. It's a high honor to have a veteran on, especially from the 15th Air Force, and that's one of the featured characters in this book. Joe, I found out just in the 10 or 15 minutes before the show, as we were preparing, Joe was born and raised on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. Did I get that right, Joe?
That's right. I have a liberal education.
About as liberal as it can be on Bourbon Street, right?
Yes, yes.
Now, lest you think he grew up drinking bourbon, what was your family doing on Bourbon Street in 1925, Joe?
Well, 1925, I was born.
Right.
They actually had a fruit stand in the French market from 1925 to 1932. And that was, I was born in 25. So my mother had to take me from the house on Bourbon Street to the fruit stand in the French market for 7 years. And she got tired, decided to build a little fruit stand on Bourbon Street, which she did. And that's where we lived from 1925 on, out of the fruit stand. That's how we survived. And by the way, bought the house, paid for the house from the money made on that little fruit stand.
Yeah. Very, very different than the Bourbon Street in the French Quarter most of us know today. From
yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed it is.
Yeah. So it's a pleasure, Joe. Let us get started with the story here from Chuck, and then we're going to bring you in and ask you to talk about how you got in the Air Force and how you got assigned to the 15th. But we'll hold on just a minute or two. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Let me pull up the slides that we have here for the presentation, and let me get it correctly teed up here. Correctly is the word I'm trying to get to. Here we are. Okay. Is everybody seeing the screen okay now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So this is really just the cover of the book, right? And then here's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Chuck, you want to just walk us through this?
Yeah, my goal in writing this was to, of course, tell the story of what happened, but also to give as much context as I could behind it without sort of getting lost in the weeds. So it's about the airmen while they're in the air, how they get shot down, how they meet their fate on the ground. They're either captured or killed or rescued by Chetniks or partisans. And it's really designed to impart the whole experience that they had, what it was like to be in the air, what their experience was on the ground, hopefully you can smell the acrid air as the planes warm up while you're reading this book. It's designed to recreate the period to the extent that it can be on the written page.
Right, and you do it very successfully, Chuck. And just to emphasize again, Chuck got into this when his father was still alive. What was that story, Chuck? With you and your father found some material and microfilm.
Well, it started because my parents had written to each other during World War II. There were over 600 letters apiece, and those letters had sat in our attic for many, many moons, and sort of wasting away. And finally, we took a look at them about 1999, and that prompted us to begin researching this. So at first, we were just trying to figure out what had happened to him. But as time went on, we realized that he had participated in two great adventures. He was shot down twice. his first time was over Romania, and that was kind of a hairy story. And we thought, well, that was the adventure. But I didn't realize till I got into it that it was really the second time he got shot down over Yugoslavia that was the real story here. And so we set about researching not just him and his crew, but 13 crews who ended up in this town in then Yugoslavia, now Bosnia. The town is called Sanski Most. And I went around the country and interviewed 40 veterans, including Joe. Found other interviews that were done by others. And the story you're referring to is the fact that my father and I went to that building in the background there, the Air Force Historical Research Agency, to find microfilm at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. And it happened that while both of us were searching through the microfilm, it was my father who had trained at that base who discovered the mother lode of these microfilms. And he was quite excited. I've never seen him more excited in his entire life than when he discovered those microfilms. So somebody was watching over that one.
Yeah, excellent. And you certainly use that as a base then to do all the other research and write this wonderful book. So let's start the story here with the next slide, right? Two very handsome men on this screen right now. Two very young, handsome men. I don't know, Joe, do you recognize yourself there?
Indeed, I do. Yes, I love it. I had many of them made and passed them out at every Air Force base I went to. With the young ladies.
And you would have been how old in this photo? Do you remember, Joe?
Yes. I just made 19.
19. Wow. So tell us how you got into the Army Air Force. When did you join? Go ahead.
In 1941, the war, the Pearl Harbor happened, I think, in 41.
Right.
I was a junior in high school, and of course, patriotism was all around you. And I got to be 17 and thinking about getting into service, I decided I would like to be an airman. But what goes with that is, while I was in high school, I managed to fly in one of those cheap airplanes for 25 cents. The pilot took me up and two of my friends for a round robin and back to the airport in high school. So I wanted to be a flyer from then on. And the Navy was advertising, so I took a test and I didn't qualify. And then the Air Corps began advertising, and I took a test for them, and they made me a pre-cadet. And so I was 17 when I took the test, but I graduated in 43, and in 43 November I made 18. Well, then I got a call from the Air Force or the Air Corps, and I reported with 15 other men to the railroad station on December 25th, Christmas Eve. 15 of us get in the train and head for Camp Shelby for induction into the Air Corps.
Okay. So you started your training in late 1943 and early 1944.
44.
44. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
At 18 years old.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. We'll come back to more of your story in a little bit here, Joe.
Okay.
Let's let Chuck tell a bit of the story of his father, when he was born, where he grew up, how he got interested in the Air Force. Chuck.
Well, my father grew up just north of your territory in East Brady, Pennsylvania, and his story was, I think, similar to Joe's, and maybe Joe and I can compare stories here. But my father joined the Air Force because he didn't want to be in the Navy because he couldn't swim. And he just couldn't picture himself slogging through muddy foxholes for the war. And meanwhile, the Air Corps or the Army Air Forces was sort of the glory profession. It was pilots were the stars of the time, and everybody in the air were stars at the time, and that was the place to be if you could get there. So, and by the way, there were very rigorous testing requirements. When Joe says casually he passed tests, he passed tests. I mean, real tests, and he had to be basically perfect physically and show a high degree of intelligence as well, just to get in. So these guys were the elite of their time.
Right. How old was your father at the time of this photo, Chuck?
Well, he's let's see, that's his commissioning photo in early 44. So he was 21, I think.
21. Okay. And here a little bit more about the background of your father.
Yeah, I got ahead of myself a little bit talking about the classification system, but Joe, I don't know if Joe went to Nashville, but that's where a lot of the guys were classified in their specialties. And my father goes through pilot training like everybody else, and soloed after 11 hours flight. And he entered pilot training knowing that about half of the recruits would wash out, so to speak. In other words, fail flight training, but remain in the Air Forces in some other capacity. And my father was lucky enough to get through pilot training and be named as a first pilot as opposed to a co-pilot.
Right. And Joe, what was your training like, and how did you end up getting classified? What kind of a job did you end up having?
By the way, it was they sent me to classification center in Texas.
Oh, San Antonio.
Yes, and they had a very specific way of evaluating the men that were applying. And they had a special scoring set up with the scores 9, 9, and 9.
Right.
At the top of the score to qualify for the position. I made a 6.44. You needed 7 to get into pilot training. So everybody under 7 or under 6 went into the other parts of the gunnery school and radio school and mechanical school. So I was, I guess, destined to be a gunner. And then they sent me to a gunnery training. I forget the name of it, but that was in Texas too, where I learned gunnery training. And boy, was that exciting. The first time they took us up in an airplane, we had 3 men. And of the 3 of us, I was first. And this was a plane that had the belly turret that drops down out of the plane. Here's your first time flying. And the guy says, all right, who's going to be first? And he has you pick a straw or something, and I picked first. So they put me in this belly turret and dropped down out of this airplane, listening to all these noises and air and stuff. Scares the hell out of you, but then you get used to it. And that's the beginning of my training in gunnery school.
So did you end up as a waist gunner or as a turret gunner?
I was going to be a turret gunner, a belly turret. And boy, I was lucky because they took me out of that, made me a waist gunner. Yes. I became a waist gunner, and I was quite happy about that.
I can imagine so. I just can't imagine the terrifying ordeal and being in that belly turret thing underneath the plane.
Yeah. At 5'8", I was a little big to be getting in it in the first place.
Yeah. And these were these were what, 50 caliber machine guns you're shooting from the waist, correct?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah.
What's it like to shoot a 50 caliber machine gun, Joe? I've always wanted to do it, never have.
Makes a lot of noise, I guarantee you. It has a lot of force behind it.
Yeah.
Not to get ahead of the thing, but in my flying during the war, I didn't see an enemy airplane. We had great escorts that took care of us, I must say.
Yeah. Okay. So Joe, then you finished your training in the States. When did you find out you were being assigned to the 15th Air Force?
Gosh.
Tell us about your trip from the States to Italy.
Well, in Virginia was a deportation place, and they put us aboard a ship, and we were 27 days on the high seas. They had those groups of ships that went across the ocean. And so for 27 days, we were just riding in this victory ship. Mm-hmm. We had become a crew. We knew our crew. I had Leo, Walensky, Champy, Co, and Dick, and who was the last? I don't know. Anyway, we had 5 of us. Maybe getting a little rough there.
It's okay, Joe. So you were already part of a B-24 crew.
Yes, and for 27 days we were aboard ship. That was quite an experience.
And you landed where in southern Italy?
Bari, I think, was where
Yeah.
we ended up. And from there they took us into the 15th Air Force group, the 459 bomb group, which was in the 15th Air Force.
Okay. Let me put the pictures back up here. We'll go to Chuck again and tell a little bit more about his father's story.
Sure. This is a photograph of the plane that my father was shot down in the first time. As I said, he was shot down twice. That's the Fertile Turtle, named after an Ogden Nash poem. That's a little ribbled. And anyway, that turtle is dropping dubious bombs out its rear end.
I didn't see that to begin with, I have to tell you.
I think bombs were called eggs then, so it could have been eggs.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, the Fertile Turtle went down on October 13th, 1944, and my father was forced to is pilot, of course, and he's the last one to bail out. It's his responsibility to make sure everybody else is out before he bails. And because of that, and because the plane was in rough shape, he bailed out from they guess about 300 feet, which is not recommended, especially in the parachutes of that time. I think even today, in modern parachutes, you don't want to jump from, even like the stunt parachute guys don't jump from under 1,000 feet.
Right.
He pulled the ripcord as he was leaving the bomb, while he was in the plane, really, as he was jumping out the bomb bay, or else he wouldn't have survived. And it's down close to a miracle that he did.
And this is the first bailout.
First time he bailed out, he ended up with Romanian citizens. He had passed the Russian lines, and he's one of the few Americans who has seen what it's like behind the Eastern Front. And he was transported to Bucharest, Romania, where there were remnants of Operation Reunion, which was salvaging the POWs who had been shot down during the Ploesti raids. And fortunately, there was still a mission there. So once he got to Bucharest, it was a pretty easy jaunt to get back to Italy.
Well, you would think after that adventure, that's enough adventure for one lifetime, one war. They put him right back in the pilot's seat.
That will come into play. Well, they sent him to Capri first, which I'm sure was something of a consolation. I don't know. Hey, Joe, did you get to go to Capri or on rest leave to anywhere good like Rome?
Yes, my squadron commander, I was missing in action for over 50 days. And at that time, if you were missing in action for 42 days, they'd send you back to the States. So I spoke to my commander and asked him, aren't you going to send me home? He says, what are you talking about? He didn't know anything. He says, so I'll send you to the Isle of Capri for 10 days and then I'll let you know. Well, I did the 10 days, had a hell of a lot of fun there. Go back to the commander and I asked him, well, what's happening? He says they changed the rules from 42 days to 60. So I had to go back to flying.
Wow.
I made 5 missions and then the war ended.
Yeah.
I ended up with a total of 18 missions. And the other men in my crew finished their 35. Had I been not separated from them when we left Yugoslavia, I would have made my 35. But my trip in Yugoslavia, I ended up in the hospital. So I didn't fly very much, only 5 missions, and then the war ended.
So the audience will appreciate that a little bit later once we tell the story of how you and Lieutenant Stanley and the others walked out of Yugoslavia. But to think that after that experience, you still had to go back and fight is just amazing. Let's spend just a couple of minutes here, Chuck, on for those in the audience who might not quite appreciate the difference between the 8th and the 15th Air Force. Chuck, 8th Air Force flying out of England, covering most of Europe. 15th Air Force covers what? Sort of southern Europe, according to this map.
Yeah, the 8th was about 3 times as big as the 15th, and is much more famous, I think, largely because of movies and television and Memphis Belle and 12 O'Clock High and that stuff. And the fact is that, and the 8th deserves it because they were really the only second front there was in 1942 and 1943. And, I think a lot of people don't realize how dangerous it was to be in the air. And that's why Memphis Belle was a big deal. It was supposed to be the first plane that survived 25 missions. It was actually the second, but somehow they picked the Memphis Belle to do the tour stateside. And the casualty rate was just astonishing. It was higher than it was among the Marines in the Pacific. And, it was dangerous up there, and it was still dangerous when Joe and my father were flying, but it was extremely, extremely dangerous at the height of the bombing raids in 1943. Yeah. So Italy surrenders in mid 44, and the Air Force decides to put bases in what they thought would be sunny Italy, thinking they would get better flying weather. And that didn't quite work out, but you can see that it can reach places that the 8th couldn't.
And one of the things the audience need to print. So here's the Foggio, if I have that pronunciation right, Foggio, in southern Italy. And I remember somebody in a lecture I was giving years ago said, "Well, why did they put it there? Why didn't they put it up here?" I said, "Well, first of all, they conquered southern Italy first. Took a long time to get to Rome. Second of all, it's like one of the few flat places there are in Italy. Most of this is mountains and so forth. So, they flew out of Foggio over often, as you see here, Yugoslavia, to these targets in southern Europe. Right.
That's right. And the other reason that they put the 15th down there was because Albert Speer, who historically minded people know was Hitler's architect and sort of logistical genius. He put all the oil refineries outside the reach of the 8th because he knew how important they were to the Reich. Right. And really the 15th had 2 main goals. One was to attack those oil refineries, and the other was to hit rail lines and what they call communications networks, what we mean by transportation, that to support the Russians. And, the Russians always like to say that we weren't helping them over there. Well, we were. The 15th Air Force was helping them. We were bombing the marshalling yards that were supplying the Germans on the Eastern Front, which is right about the border of this map as in the time period we're speaking.
Over this way, yeah.
Over that.
Unless they would have been just to the right of what we have here.
Yes. And I'd say right about the in Romania is where they were down there when my father was trying to get to the Russian lines.
Okay. So let's set the story up with a understanding of what was going on in what was then Yugoslavia. Okay. Because it plays an integral part of this. It's a lot complex politically because there's so many different players at war here in Yugoslavia / now Bosnia. And Chuck does just a great job in the book of explaining this. The best explanation I've ever had. So Chuck, tell us what was happening here in this region of the world at that time.
Well, I think some of your viewers are going to remember the Balkan Wars of the 1990s and how nasty they were, and all that was sort of anticipated by what occurred in World War II, and the same factions were fighting in the 90s as were fighting during World War II. So not only is the war between the Allies and the Axis happening, but there's a genocidal civil war happening. Actually, I'm misspeaking. There are genocidal civil wars happening between the communist partisans and the Serbian Chetniks, between the Croatians, who are, believe it or not, probably worse at genocide than the Nazis, Muslim militias. It's probably the most complex domestic situation that you can find in World War II, and that's saying something.
Yeah. And these were the two main players on the ground in Yugoslavia at the time.
As far as the Allies were concerned, certainly. And there's on the left, there's Tito, who's the head of the communist partisans, and General Draža Mihailović, who's the leader of the Chetniks. And I go through the story of how at first the British, this was considered to be a British sphere of influence. The Americans only sort of got involved much later in the war in 1944. So at first it was all Britain, and they backed Mihailović. Mihailović was an officer in the old Yugoslavian army who kept fighting, to his credit, after the Germans took over the country. And he became the face of the resistance movement, not just in Yugoslavia, but in all of Europe. Appeared on the cover of Time magazine, and was a very big deal at the time. The problem was that the British discovered over time that the Chetniks were not fighting as hard as the British would have liked, and that they were sort of, to make a very long, complicated story short, generally speaking, Mihailović's strategy was to sit and protect the Serbian people and wait for the Allies to land, whereas Tito, being a communist, was under orders from Moscow to put up as much of a fight as he could. So he was fighting generally, and Mihailović wasn't, and they were fighting each other. And the British were supplying arms at first to both, and until the agents reported that the two factions were using the arms to kill each other instead of to kill Germans. And eventually, as time went on, Churchill realized that that was counterproductive and basically disavowed Mihailovich and the Chetniks, and I think correctly decided that he needed to give the arms to the communists, even though he knew they were communists, and he's probably the most ardent anti-communist of the 20th century. So that shows you how desperate he was at the time.
Yeah, as you said on this one slide, he based his decision on who killed more Germans, and the communists were killing more Germans.
They just were, and there's no getting around that.
No. And this is Tito on the far right.
It is, with his staff. This was taken outside his cave by a British journalist just before the Germans staged a daring attack to try to capture or kill Tito. And that becomes part of the book because Tito escaped via a route that some of the airmen follow later on. And I think the chapter ended up being called Following in Tito's Footsteps, because that's basically what they did. Some of them bailed out near this town that Tito's in here in Drvar, including Scotty Stewart and Robert Dean, two of the pilots of the 13 crews.
Yeah, yeah. And the difficulty here, to go back to this map, is for your father, for Joe Foto, for all these men flying these missions, if I can follow my arrow here, they're fundamentally flying this way, north, to hit their targets, right? Here in southern Germany, Austria, Hungary, Romania, etc. And they're having to fly right over this land that is being so contested by all these various factions.
Certainly.
And when they're shot down, they're shot down. Or when they run out of fuel, like Joe's plane did, they run out of fuel and they have to land where they can land. And they had no idea where they were going to land, which faction they were going to end up with. Is that right?
That's right. And one of the main factors was that most of these crews were flying in B-24s rather than B-17s, and a B-24 was a great plane, and we probably won't get into it here, but there's a little section of the book that does a little comparative story on which was the better plane, B-24s or B-17s, and airmen like to debate that ad nauseum. The fact is they were both great planes, and they both had their advantages and disadvantages. But one of the main advantages of a B-24 is that you don't want to land it in water. It would crack up, and chances are it would sink before the crew could get out. So if you were shot up over, say, Hungary, or as you see in the map there, or Slovakia, or any of these places, actually southern Poland was where a lot of them went, you had to be pretty darn sure that you could cross the Adriatic if you were going to attempt it. If you didn't think you could make it, or think you had low chances of making it, you were much better off trying to land on an emergency airfield on the island of Vis off the coast there, or bailing out somewhere in what's labeled as Croatia there. It was Croatia then, now it's modern day Croatia and Bosnia.
And this map, Chuck, is what? What's unique about this map?
This was, I don't know if Joe had one in his escape kit, but my father had one in his escape kit. And this is actually an escape map that I got from the son of one of the other airmen. But yeah, this is what they packed. It was called silk. It was really nylon, but it was called a silk map that they carried with them, and they couldn't carry paper because if it got waterlogged, it would be destroyed. So I still have some in my possession here.
Joe, do you remember your escape kit?
Oh, yes, indeed. Very, very much. Every guy had an plastic escape kit. And in it, you had medications to help kill the pain, had medications to stop all kinds of stuff to help you. And you also had 48 American dollars. That was like gold. The kunas, I think you got 5,000 kunas for $1 American dollar. So we would, when you landed with that, you had money and you could buy food, and it helped very much. I lost my kit when I bailed out. The straps on the parachute had me tangled up, and I was bearing such pain. I had a bag that I had put my shoes in, because you fly with electric shoes, and my GI shoes were in this bag. I looked like a full of brush man, and the pain was so much from the parachute hurting my private that I threw the damn full of brush bag away, and I had no escape kit and no shoes. All I had was the flying boots. Yes, that was quite a help, and everybody needed that escape kit, and they took care of us. They indeed did.
Yeah, it was about the size of a shoebox, right, Joe? Maybe a little smaller?
A little smaller. It was,
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's, well, first, maybe we should pause here, Sean, for a moment and ask the audience if there's questions up to this point that are either in the chat room or people would like to pose. We should probably recognize a couple of people that we know are on as well that Chuck knows. That would start with, is Charles Stewart III? Do I have that right?
Is Charlie on? I didn't know that.
Yes, I am on. I'm here. I just put my video up.
Oh, there we are.
Watching with my family, and there's my dad was well, Chuck praised my dad's and our family because we saved all of my dad's letters. And I think, Chuck, you said that only 10% of the airmen families were able to supply you letters that they had saved. And so that was fun to be able to give you about, 30 letters that he had sent, and the telegram that my grandmother received when he was missing in action November 17, 1944, when he had to bail out with his crew. And Powell Robinson Jr. is still alive, and he's in his mid 90s, and he was on my dad's crew, and I sent him your Lost Airmen book, and he really appreciated that. And so the other thing I did that helped Chuck was I interviewed my dad and his crew in 1988 when they were having a 25th reunion, and I sent a tape recorder to each one of his crew members, and I had them record what their memories were from joining the military until bailing out and then being rescued, which Chuck will explain how that all happened. But my dad really only gave that story once in its full detail, and I was fortunate I had tape recorder and I was able to record it.
Great, Charlie. We're very, very happy you did, and you got that information to Chuck, because I've read the book, obviously, and read about your father's experience. And one of how many crews? Remind me, Chuck. How many?
There were 13, and yes, I'll tell you, I could not have written that chapter the way I wrote it without the work that Charlie had done in anticipation of me coming along 5 years later or something like that. So particularly because his father had passed away, and I got a chance to meet a lot of the guys personally, but memories fade, and Charlie and his mother Caroline were so important to my research.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Charles, for being on, and thank you for your efforts there. Sean, are there questions that anybody in the audience has asked in the chat room, or that they'd like to ask up to this point in time?
If anybody would like to speak up or raise their hand at this point, I do not see any in the chat or on the social media, YouTube or Facebook.
Well, we must be doing just a superior job, Chuck, in explaining the story.
One hand up here on the. Go ahead.
That's me, Bob Buck.
Bob Buck. Yeah. Hey, how are you?
I'm great. I'd like to ask Joe if he happened to go to gunnery school in Las Vegas by any chance.
No, I didn't. Laredo, Nueva Laredo was when we were in gunnery school. I'd like to mention that I went into service in 43, December of 43. December of 44, I went down on my mission, December the 18th, 1 year later. I thought that was extraordinary to have been trained and 7 days on the ocean, going overseas and then flying and going down.
Yeah. Was there some reason that you wanted to know if he trained in Las Vegas?
Not me. I didn't ask that.
No, I'm sorry, Bob.
Yes, I had a friend of mine whose father. I have a friend of mine whose father. He when he went to go into the service, he told him in Pittsburgh that he wanted to be a gunner on a B-17, and he didn't even get a chance to go home. They called his parents, told him send his stuff downtown. Go by, and they sent him. Well, he was so good when he trained a couple of times that he was sent to gunnery school in Las Vegas, and that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning how difficult it is with the technology of those times to hit a moving object from a moving object. So, Joe trained from, I think, you tell me, Joe, from the back of a truck using shotguns at first.
That was the most fun I had in service.
I'll bet.
They put a shotgun, I think, with 18 bullets in it, and you were shooting for the pigeons. They have 18 houses in a U shape, and the truck would pass each house, and they'd holler 4, and they'd shoot the pigeon out in different directions. And 18 shots, and every time my thumb would hit my nose, I had a black eye when I was. That was the most fun I had in service, was that Kelly shooting, pigeon shooting. Yeah, that was from a moving base to a moving target. It was perfect training for flying.
And if I may interject one more thing here, it's Bob again. My friend's father wanted to be a gunner on a B-17, and when he went in, he was on a Liberator. And he flew 31 missions out of England.
I don't.
So I just wanted to interject that he wanted to be 17. He ended up on the Liberator.
Yeah.
I'll also mention that there were 3 training commands in the United States. There was the Eastern Command, the Central Command, and the Western Command. So my father, being from the East, was in the Eastern Command, and Joe, being from well, he was from the South, but he naturally was in the Texas-based training command, and then there was a Western training command as well. So yeah, the 3 really never did meet, and that's just how it was. That's how the Army was divided at the time.
Okay, let me bring us back to the story. And I sort of just noticed it's already getting close to 8 o'clock. So I want to get to the main part of the story, because we've set this up, I think, quite nicely. Chuck, I'm going to jump over 2 or 3 slides to get to the story here. And we'll pick this up. Is everything up on the screen okay? People can see it again?
I've got a B-24 exiting a the flak.
Right. And this was the problem. These B-24s flying their missions to southern Germany, to Austria, et cetera, et cetera. What would happen to them? Chuck, describe what happened to your father.
Well, Joe mentioned that he never saw a German plane, thank goodness, because at this point of the war, the Luftwaffe was mostly destroyed. And they didn't dare attack formations very often anyway. It would happen, but not often. And but what would happen is they'd fly over their targets, 5 or 6 minutes of intense bombardment from flak guns below, throwing up these explosions that you see in the background there, shooting out fragments of shrapnel. And this shows a plane having caught one in the engine. And if Joe had seen a German plane, he might not be sitting here right now, because they would pick on stragglers. So in other words, the German fighters would not attack a formation, but they would attack a plane that was lagging because it had lost an engine or two, and that would be the end of that plane. So a single plane didn't have much chance against a German fighter at that time.
And at that point, these men had no choice but to bail out.
And then they bail out, and this is a good illustration of the exit points that they had. Joe can tell us, I think he bailed out the rear hatch there, the camera hatch.
Yeah.
There were only so many ways you can get out.
Well,
What was that experience like? You said earlier about how painful it was because the chute got caught up in your body.
I practiced bailing out when the ship was docked. I'd open that hatch for the camera and jump through that hatch, and it worked perfect. So when we were in trouble with the two engines caulking out on us, and I had thrown the camera out and opened the hatch, I had to open the hatch to throw the camera out. And the pilot gave the signal to get ready to jump. I jumped. I was first guy out the ship. I didn't look back, up, down, and I hit the silk and hollered Geronimo like I was a paratrooper. I was glad to get out of that plane, because boy, I feared, the plane with two engines, you just don't survive.
Am I circling the right place that Joe jumped out of, Chuck?
Yeah, that's the rear hatch, a little to the right.
It's a deck hatch.
Oh, here. Okay.
So it was perfect. I'm facing the back, and the plane's going in the other direction. So that makes it easy when the chute pops out.
Yeah.
It blossoms out and just slows your speed down. It don't give you a big, heavy jerk or anything.
And your father, Chuck, would have jumped out from where? He'd have been
Jumped out to Bombay, because basically, as the last one, actually, there's a story in there that he and the co-pilot got to the door to the Bombay, and the co-pilot hesitated. And my father distracted him by pointing downwards and shoved him out of the airplane because the co-pilot was in the way. And then my father jumped out of that Bombay. So there were basically, depending upon how you count it, 3 or 4 places you could jump out: the front or the rear of the Bombay, the nose wheel hatch, and the rear hatch, which is where they would fit their aerial cameras if they were carrying one.
Can't imagine a more terrifying experience. I just can't.
And by the way, I think, Joe, you had an aerial camera in your plane, right?
Yes. But all the camera did was shoot where the bombs hit. That was the only pictures we were taking.
Right. So you had jettisoned that giant camera to give you room to bail out.
That was about a $5,000 camera, and I threw it out, throwing everything out the plane when the engines start going bad.
Right. So they could get
move the 50 calibers because they were in too tight.
right.
So here we are in late 1944. Your father's plane, the second shoot down, came up what date, Chuck?
December 2nd.
December 2nd, 1944. And at this point, these air crews are being shot down or running out of fuel or whatever is their problem. And they're jumping into what is present day Bosnia. And why are they stranded in this Bosnian city of Sanski Most?
Well, the crews had been briefed that this was partisan controlled territory, and the navigators had been told that if you have to bail out, this was a good spot because it was basically the only flat part of Bosnia, and at least that was anywhere near there. And actually, I've had a chance to fly over Bosnia in a helicopter, and I can vouch for that. Those mountains in Bosnia look something like the Adirondacks do in New York State. They're pretty rugged and pretty high, and there's not a lot of flat territory. But the airmen were stranded there because that river there had flooded, and the field outside of town was soggy, too soggy to land airplanes on. And meanwhile, the Germans were retreating and had surrounded that territory. So there was really no place for them to go for quite a while.
And there's a lot of missions being flown by the 15th Air Force. And as you say here now, a little bit later, between December 16th and 26th, 40 airmen pour in, right? And there were how many already there?
Joe's mission, I think, was part of that oil blitz. I forget what Joe's target was, but yeah, that they'd have decided to knock out that oil supply once and for all in that week, and really went at them. So that's why so many guys were bailing out in that period.
Our target was Oswiecim, Poland.
Yeah,
Synthetic oil plant.
right. Right, next to the Auschwitz concentration camp.
That's correct. That's correct.
So yeah, that was an oil target. Absolutely, one of the biggest.
So by this point, Christmas of 1944, there's 80 odd airmen now in Sanski Most.
The final crew made it 84.
84. Okay. And Joe, tell us a little bit about your bailout. You've already told us about your bailout. Once you landed, what happened to you? Who found you? How did they shepherd you to Sanski Most?
Okay, I landed on the side of a church, and I laid there because I hit the ground pretty hard, not having experienced it before. And then two men with red stars came to help me, to assist me. I hurt my knee and my ankle. So what they did was they helped me get to the village. And the village was made up of huts that had mud for floors and the fire in the middle. And all these villagers were around me, hollering and screaming. And I took my chute off and gave it to some old lady. I was trying to take my electrical suit off and give it to somebody, but they wouldn't let me because I was sweating so much. I was so nervous, they wouldn't let me. They figured I'd catch a cold or something. But while I'm doing this, one of the Yugoslavs with the red star is telling me Pataban, and he's pointing his hand, 5 fingers. So I assumed he was talking about parachuters. So I dragged his arm and said, take me. Well, I couldn't walk, so they got a donkey for me and put me on a donkey. Wow. And rode on the back of that donkey from two or three farmhouses. And we come to this one house, and there's an American Jeep out in the front. I couldn't figure this out. Didn't know, And a British major sticks his head out the door. I say, old chap, how are you? I said, that's great. He says, jump in the Jeep and I'll take you to town. And so I jumped into the Jeep and off we went into Sanski Most, where they were going to take me what was there, a medical center, a shed with bunks in it with guys with shot up arms, shot up legs. And I got just a sprained knee or something. I wouldn't let them put me in there with those guys. I said, no, I don't want to be in there. So they put me up in a billet on some house that was where I stayed for the time I was there.
Yeah. And Chuck, there are quite a few airmen that were badly hurt that were in that medical center, in quotes, really just a hut, a building with very minimal
help. In fact, Charlie's father was probably the worst injured of them all. He had compound fractures in his thigh, and really was in a bad way and in risk of losing his leg. So, I don't know if I stressed that enough in the book, that time was of the essence for him and for the other injured men. They had to get out of there and get proper medical attention, because really the so-called hospital was just a warehouse for injured people.
Right. And I'm going to move a little quicker here. This is a great shot. This is in a building in Sanski Most.
It is. The two airmen are by the right-hand post there. And the rest of them are partisans.
And Joe,
You can see that they don't really have uniforms. They just wore what they could.
Yeah. Joe, describe the conditions for us in Sansky Most. What was it like there? How did these people treat you?
Oh, they treated us nicely. The only thing they objected to was we had money and everything, all the prices went up. It was a farm area, and every Tuesday, I think, all the farmers would come in with their products, and we go there and buy what we wanted, mostly apples and nuts. You had to go to the bathroom, or you needed something to make you move. You bought apples, or you bought the nuts. And they had their little old scales that they put one thing over here and then add to it to make it a kilo in this talk. There was a restaurant there. They had what they call beefsteak and oatmeal or cornmeal mush. I got sick of that stuff. I couldn't eat it anymore. You had two breads. There was a brown bread and a black bread. The black bread had no yeast in it. And boy, if you ate it, you would blow up with gas. I'm going to tell you, that was miserable. The bathrooms, for outhouses, they dig holes in the floor. And there was one house that was a two-story house, and you had a hole on the second floor and a hole on the first floor, all straight together. If you use the one on top, you had to be worried about falling in the hole and you really get hurt. One time they had a Christmas party. We went to the Christmas party, and rakia was a drink of, I don't know, it was potato juice or pear juice, but it was strong. Anyway, there were some Dalmatian girls that were there, and naturally, we were trying to talk to the Dalmatian girls, and the Yugoslavs who were helping us, the Partisan says, near Dover, they're no good. They were with the Germans when the Germans were here. So we shut down that point of attachment. We left. We didn't get involved with any of the girls after that.
Okay. So, Joe, we know you were part of the co-crew. You're shot down and sent to Sansky Most, as we said. There's already British agents there trying to help these men to escape, and they're dropping supplies in as best they can. This is, I think, just outside of town, Chuck.
They did. They dropped supplies just out of town. That might have been before Joe got there, but there was a supply drop that helped things considerably, including medical supplies that might have helped Scotty Stewart get some pain meds for a little while anyway.
Yeah.
It was always my idea that we had radio contact with 15th Air Force, and they would send us K rations.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I had no way of verifying that because I didn't know any of the people, the military leaders that had that contact.
Right. That British major you met had a radio man with him who was in contact with Barry.
And I have something that we used to hear that the plane with food was supposed to come was an American plane. And the report was he wouldn't leave the ground because the weather was too bad. Well, later on in the day, a British Lancaster flew over and dropped food for us. So boy, I was a little angry with the 15th Air Force.
I didn't know about that one, Joe. That's a good story. And yes, they had Lancasters with the Balkan Air Force who were, it was a bigger plane. Maybe they could get away with worse weather. I don't know. Not to make excuses.
So the story is that all these airmen are stacked up. It's not a town with the resources to take care of them. They're doing the best they can, but it's causing problems, right?
Yeah.
And Chuck, explain why. I mean, there was an airfield just outside of town. Why couldn't the 15th Air Force fly in planes to rescue these men and take them out? What was the problem?
I guess, three problems, I'd say. First you have to deal with weather in Italy when they're taken off. Then you have to deal with weather in Yugoslavia where they'd land. And then there was the problem of the airfield that I discussed, that the airfield was too soggy even for those marvelous C-47 transports. And so they had to wait for proper weather and for that airfield to solidify. And finally, it got cold enough. It was about, what would you say, Joe? It was about around 32, 35 most of the days you were there?
Yeah, oh, it was always cold.
Yeah, always cold, but not real cold.
We went down December the 18th. What happened on December the 16th when the Germans made that push? Bastogne was happening. So the concentration of the military people was on Bastogne rather on us to be brought back into service.
That's another great point, Joe.
Yeah.
Everybody was thinking about the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh,
Right.
yes, indeed. Mhm.
The tension was elsewhere. And then the final crew that gets stacked up in Sanski Most is what's called the Blood Crew. And Chuck, tell us why this is important.
Well, it's called the Blood Crew because their pilot was David Blood. They're the final crew that ends in Sanski Most. And if there's an American villain in the piece, it's Captain Johnson, who was trying to collect flight pay. If he flew once a month, he would boost his salary by 50%. So he would go out on missions periodically. And it was the end of the month on December 26th, and he decided to tag along on this mission. And but he sort of treats it as a lark. He had been in other missions, some of them pretty dangerous, but he sort of acted like he was a tourist. And the picture that you see here was taken with his camera that's taken on the morning that he's taking off. And but he doesn't bring a medical bag. He brings a camera. Now he might have lost his medical kit anyway if in the bailout, but still. That aggravated quite a few people, and when he gets to the ground, he's a captain, and he outranks everybody in town, and I'm sure Joe remembers that once you're on the ground, really rank didn't matter so much.
Can I interject on that?
Sure, please.
Okay, the C-47s, I think 3 of them came down. I was the first guy in the first plane sitting in my seat. And that flight surgeon ordered me off the plane. He had some sick buddies to put on that plane. And that's why I had to walk back with the other 18 men that walked over the minor chain of the Dinaric Alps. Yeah.
He did. And in fact, if I have it right, Joe, I think he was the one who actually took your seat.
He may have, but boy, he had me angry. I'll guarantee you.
Oh, a lot of the guys I interviewed we're still mad at him 60 years later.
So let's give the audience a little more background to this, Joe and Chuck. Finally, 3 747s arrive with decent enough weather. The field is frozen enough, and they arrive after several failed attempts to take all of these men out. Right. Chuck, tell us what happens from there.
I interject there too. They
Sure.
limited 22 men to the C-47. That C-47 would hold about 60 rather than 22 because of the soft field that they had to take off. And that's why only 66 men came out with those 3 planes. And the rest of us, the 18, had to walk.
That's interesting, Joe. I haven't heard that theory before either, and that makes sense to me because I've always wondered why only 66. I speculated that it was because those planes usually took 22 paratroopers, but a lot more weight. And but what you say makes a lot of sense now.
Mm-hmm.
So the story is that these 3 planes land. They, as Joe has said, they could have taken all of the airmen out, but instead only 66 are taken out, leaving 18. But Joe and Chuck, give us a little more detail. What happens here? Dr. Johnson pulls rank on Joe and several others. And how did that happen? What
They do. It was the first plane naturally carried the wounded, and there were, roughly 20 wounded, and so them and the first people to arrive in town were given priority, and that was the rule they had sort of agreed upon with each other, that those who were the longest tenured in town naturally would be the first ones out, priority wise. And Joe had somehow ended up on the final plane. My father volunteers to stay behind, and Glenn, you had made a great point that these guys had already jumped once, and were not in a hurry to get back to Italy, I don't think. And so I think that was part of my father's reasoning, and plus the major who was in charge of the three planes promised to come back the next day, and my father said to himself, "Sure, I can wait a day." Well, of course, he never came back, but we'll get to that. So and then Johnson tries to get himself on the first plane and the second plane, and then finally the third plane, and finally he says, "Hey, I'm the captain. You guys are lieutenants and sergeants, and you guys get out. And an order is an order, right or wrong." And Johnson, as I described, had been one of the on the last crew to arrive in Sansky Most. So by rights, his crew of 10 should have been the ones to stay behind, and instead he pulls rank and puts his friend the pilot on, and boots Joe and Bob Kidder and other guys who had to walk out.
It's almost hard to fathom, isn't it, that someone would take an action like that?
Yes, it is. And anyway,
Yeah.
but it at least it provides drama for the book. I'll say that.
Yeah. Okay. So the plane, the rescue planes promise to come back. They don't come back, I think fundamentally because of bad weather.
Yeah, certainly.
Inability to land. And Joe, along with your father, 18 men in total, are now trapped in Sansky Most with really bad weather. The weather gets getting worse and worse, as I recall from the book.
Well, it is. And going back to the Battle of the Bulge again, remember, this is the worst winter of that century all over Europe.
Right.
So it's the same in France and in Yugoslavia, and it's cold and it's a blizzard.
Right. So how did these men come to decide to try to walk out of Yugoslavia?
Well, they didn't decide, they were ordered. The partisans had just plain had enough. And even though there were only 18 men left, as Joe said, all those dollars in the escape kits were wrecking the economy. And
can I interject here?
Go ahead, please.
The guys that flew out, they left the 18. They put us on a train.
They did.
I called it a Toonville Charlie. The 40 and 8 from the First War.
Yes,
they had
there it is.
A couple of 40 and 8 box cars and a couple of flat cars. All the Yugoslavs, they'd put them on the flat cars, but we flyers, the 18, had put us in the 40 and 8 box car, protect us from the wind. But the train, you had to cut the wood to make fuel. You had to get the snow to make water. And that night, the train, you could hear it chug, 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 and couldn't make it up the mountain. So they'd stop and go get more water, more food, more wood. And finally, they decided they couldn't make it. And they made us all go back to our billets. And the next morning, they said we were walking, and they gave us a lieutenant from the Yugoslav partisan group who led us, and he had an assistant, and he knew his way over the mountains. So we followed him, the 18 men.
That's right. And that picture there gives you a sense of how mountainous that territory is. So here they are. And Joe actually was lucky. One of his buddies loaned him his shoes. When Joe got kicked out of the plane, the buddy I think it was Champy gave you his shoes, right, Joe?
That's right. That's right.
Otherwise, you would have been in those flight boots, which would have been really bad.
No, it had already frozen my feet once. Yes, yes.
And this is the map that Chuck has put together for the long hike from Sansky Most to the coast. How far was this, Chuck?
Well, I think it was about 120 miles as the crow flies. If you ask modern MapQuest how far it is from Sansky Most to Split on the coast there, but but as you can see, the crows weren't flying. They had to go around the mountains or up the valleys, and actually I love this escape map because it's also kind of a topographic map. You can see that the dark orange is our mountains, and that they had to cross some very mountainous territory to.
May I interject?
Go ahead.
That's a minor chain of the Dinaric Alps.
That's right.
Right.
So mighty impressive to have walked over that.
Indeed, in those conditions with virtually no food.
Absolutely, that's right. They had a place at the top of the mountain with a heater, with a stove in it, and the guide knew where it was. And at night we'd go to sleep, and if your feet were by the stove, they were hot, and your head was cold. If you put your head by the stove and your feet out, your feet were cold and your head was hot. And that's the way we survived up on the mountains at nighttime.
And how many days did it take to make this hike?
Hell, I don't remember, to tell you the truth. But every day we'd climb a mountain, get to the top, spend the night, and then at the foot of the mountain, they'd have a village, and they'd feed us in the huts. That's all I can remember.
Chuck, how many days, Chuck?
It was about 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
At least.
Yeah, maybe closer to 3. Yeah.
And did they run into any Germans? Any any problems with the local population?
No, they didn't bother us at all. There was no. In fact, they tried to help us.
Not Germans, no. Except I think some of the guys saw some German POWs that were basically being used as slave labor by the partisans. But those were the only Germans, I think, that were spotted along that route. I think by then the retreating Germans had vacated the territory, which is why they dared send the Americans on this journey, I think.
I made a stupid mistake at one of those villages, and the guy's asking me, what do you think about the Chetniks? And I said, Chetniks near Dobra. Turns out that guy had been a Chetnik. So after that, I learned no resume. I don't understand. No resume. I wouldn't answer any questions to anybody.
Yeah. I was about to say that they didn't run into to Germans, but they did run into German sympathizers, and certainly and some of those towns were very unfriendly. They had been partisan, or they had been German sympathizers or Chetnik held, and so yeah, they needed those escorts to keep everybody in line as they pass through the territory.
So Chuck, they arrive in Split. Were there Allied forces waiting for them there? Did anybody know they were actually walking out of Yugoslavia? What happens to them in Split? How were they rescued?
Well, I'll answer that, but let's step back to Livno first, because they get to Livno, which is a pretty big town. That's at about if with your arrow, you're right about there. Yes. And 4 of the 18 stay behind there, including Joe. Joe wasn't doing very well. And, he's one of the 4 guys who stays behind. So my father reaches Split with 14 guys, he's among the 14, and Joe followed, I'd say, about a week later. But to answer your question, yes, there was an American mission in Split that had a certain amount of supplies there. And although they were always low, and they begged the group of 14 anyway to tell Bari to ship them some supplies because they were running low. They were supposed to be supplying the partisans while they were helping Americans out, and they were constantly in search of foodstuffs.
Rick asked in the comment section, what was the distance to the coast?
From Sansky Most or from Livno?
I'd say Sansky Most.
Sansky Most, that's about 120 miles.
And as you put it, as the crow flies.
As the crow flies, yeah.
As the man walks up and down these mountains.
I bet they walked about 140 miles, probably. A good 100, maybe 150.
Yeah, yeah. In freezing temperatures, and at times snow so deep it was waist high or more, Joe?
You were swimming, right, Joe? Basically.
Always ankle high. That's what made it. You had a lead man who packed the snow so the rest of us could walk.
Ah, okay.
I can remember with my feet freezing at the top of a mountain and looking down at some houses with smoke coming out. And I told the guy in charge, I said, man, I'm going down to that house down there where I can warm my feet. He says, Sarge, if you go down there, you'll die before you get there. So he had some pills in his escape kit. He gave them to me and it killed the pain. And his assistant started a fire and dried my socks and dried my shoes and fixed me up so I could have warm feet and walk and keep the snow from packing in the feet.
Wow. Wow.
Actually, Joe, I think they were amphetamines.
Oh, I'm sure they were.
Yeah. Okay, so we got just 5 minutes left here. Let's the men get the split, and the 15th Air Force flies them back to Italy. And I'm sorry, I skipped the slide here. What is this coin? Remind me of this, Chuck.
So after the 18 get back to Italy in the story, there's still the question of some of the guys who were shot down with them, crewmates, who still hadn't, escaped. And most Lieutenant Blank and about half of his crew ended up with the Chetniks. And here's where we circle back to the debates between whether to support the Chetniks or the Partisans. And by then the British had abandoned the Chetniks, and the last British agents left the Chetniks right about this time on December 27th, 1944, and actually Blank and his men show up at the camp just hours after that. So I'm sure Mihailovich said to himself, well, now I've got some Americans again. Maybe I can use these guys to negotiate some more aid out of the British and the Americans. But that never happened. And Blank and his men were stuck with the Chetniks, and they were even worse off than Joe and the rest of the Americans in Sansky Most. And they were stuck with them until April. And there's a story about how they get transferred to the Partisans near the end. But this is this is an image of the coin that Mihailovich personally gave to Lieutenant Blank as they parted ways. So this was aid these were British sovereigns, gold sovereigns that the British had given Mihailovich during the war, and he still had some, and he gave one apiece to the Americans as they parted, and he told them to use it to help buy their way out of the country and get to the coast.
Interesting. So let's get to the closing here. Joe, as you said earlier, and I'm just still amazed by this, after that incredible ordeal, you're brought back to Italy, and you do get your 10 days of leave of fun in Capri, but they bring you back to an aircrew and you have to finish the war flying a few more missions.
Yes.
Right. And Joe, obviously you make it home because you're here with us today. And here's a picture of you. Looks maybe a few years ago, Joe, holding up a picture of your crewmen, your fellow crewmen. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Do you recognize these men, Joe?
Yeah, Champy, he was the radio man. This was Tex, and this was Joe, the engineer. This is Leo Walensky, and this was, I'm confused now. I'm confused.
Oh, it's okay, Joe. It's a long time ago. But
2, 4, 6. It's just the crewman. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And a lot of these on that
And
mission.
He was, and
Yeah.
Leo was the guy I saved when he went out on anoxia. Yes.
Chuck, you were going to say something?
No, I'm just saying that part of the reason Joe doesn't remember all these guys is that they, for whatever reason, the crew kind of split up when they were in Italy. So it's only about half of the crew and here were subs on the mission that they got shot. So they sort of parted way in December, and that's why Joe doesn't necessarily remember all their names.
Okay. Okay. And Chuck, you're breaking up a little bit on us, but we just got the one picture left, and that's your father and your mother. What happens to your father after the war, Chuck?
Yeah, well, he gets home.
We may be losing Charles right here at the end, unfortunately.
Yeah.
See if he pops back on here.
Well, I'll pick it up for a little bit. Obviously, Charles makes it back to the senior, makes it back to the States, and he marries his sweetheart, who he had met just before leaving the States. Actually, just before he started his training, as I recall, perhaps in college, if I'm not mistaken.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you, Chuck.
Okay, so
There we go.
he met her at a college. That's true. While he was training, they trained in colleges to get some academic grounding before they started flying. So yes, he met my mother in May of '43, and yes, he returns home from the war, and he carried, and that wedding dress there was made from the parachute that had saved his life when he bailed out over Yugoslavia. And his joke was always that my mother had chided him for not bringing home the parachute the first time that he bailed out. So he had to go back and get shot down again to get her the material. Material was very scarce then. That's nylon, and nylon had just been invented in the 30s. And of course, silk was impossible to get, but nylon was precious too. And when Joe gave away his parachute to that Yugoslavian woman, I'm sure she couldn't have been happier because that was extremely, even more rare there. So
Yeah.
That's that story.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting study. How many American brides had their wedding dress made out of parachute material after the war? A lot.
It was kind of a thing. Not everybody, of course, brought their parachutes back, but you Google parachute wedding dress, and the Smithsonian has one, and I have one, so it's pretty cool.
Wow, I was just trying to make a joke out of that, and here it's a real thing.
It was a bit of a fad, but they were not common because there weren't, not paratroopers couldn't bring their parachutes back, but it did happen, and it was a big story at the time, and it made the papers all over the Northeast.
Yeah. So, John, we're actually a little past 8:30. It's been fantastic to have Joe Foto on and Chuck Stanley telling this story. Can we end up here? Are there any questions, Sean, that people would like to ask? Is there
I'd
anything?
like to make a statement if I may.
Oh, of course, Joe, please.
Okay, on the mission that I went down, I was flying in a plane called the 8-Ball. It was my 13th mission. So I had 2 stripes against me when I'm taking off about getting back from that mission. And I'll think about that to this day. Thank you, sir. I appreciated participating in this podcast. Thanks again.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's an honor for all of us to meet you, to hear your story. You're one of our American heroes, and we appreciate having you here. Sean, any last questions? Anybody want to volunteer anything? Comments?
Looks like Julia. Julia, if you're trying to say something, we can't hear you, though you are unmuted. And while you're fixing your audio issue, anybody in the comments section, I put the link to our survey. If you would like to take that, it's just about a 3-minute survey. Let us know what you think of the program tonight. See if Julia.
Is Henry Shepke on the?
Henry is here, and I know Henry also had put into the chat that he was hoping to connect with Chuck and Joe and get Joe's signature, and potentially connect with Chuck and see if there are any other World War II vets that he could connect with and get autographs from.
I have their contact information. Yeah, so I can make that happen.
Yeah, Henry is a big collector of World War II veteran signatures. Julia, did you have your audio? Can't seem to get it. I'm sorry to say, Julia, but maybe you could email us or email Todd, and we can get your question over to them if that's okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, we can't hear you, Julia. I apologize. Julia, Chuck, and Joe. Julia is our 101-year-old Navy Wave vet. She worked on the Enigma code back in World War II.
Wow.
Julia, I'm so sorry that we don't have your audio.
Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up. Sean, I think we're done.
Thank you, everybody, for being on the program tonight. Thank you, Glenn, for hosting a wonderful program here tonight. We will see you all next Monday for the first of a 2-parter of the Pan Am flight attendants. Hope to see you all there. And thank you, everybody, for coming on.
And my appreciation again to Chuck. Wonderful job telling this story, bringing to life your father's story, Joe's story, and all these other men. And thank you, Charlie Stewart, for being on as well. Good night, everybody.